Hello, my fellow weirdos. Who is going to protest tomorrow? Are you ready to rumble? I don't mean violence as in rumble. I mean, are you ready to speak your mind tomorrow? Hell, I am. You're gonna say, Judy, you freaking speak your mind every day. We hear it every day. Yes, but now more people will hear it at one time. Trust me, my voice is loud and it carries. And I know some of you who are asking, Judy, can you get an external mic? Because, everybody pretty much, if they do a lot, they get it because the volume differs sometimes. And, I got one. um, you think the reason I mention that is y'all think, well, you got a low voice even when we turn it up. It's still not super loud. A lot of times I've noticed that too, but see, when you have a voice that carries, I don't know if it's because it's a lower register for a female voice, or I think it has to do with like singers when they have a certain tone, which is why um, Freddie Mercury never had his buck teeth changed. Never did it because he was afraid it would change the tone of his voice. Because the configuration, because your sinuses are not the same with everybody, they're similar. But the size of that, the size of your mouth, the shape of, yeah, I mean, all of that contributes to the sound of your voice, the thickness or thinness of your vocal cords, how fast they vibrate. They're not all identical. So sometimes it might sound like my voice is low on some videos before I got this puppy, and I have not used it all the time because I forget I have it. I have to stick it off, and because I don't have a super large space here. But I'm going to try to remember it because I have noticed when I play back, it actually does sound better. But going back to the voice, you might not think I have a loud voice because of the asking of the mic and such, but I do. And I think most of the time, like everybody's voice goes up when they're excited or when they're like really angry or upset. Your voice level does change. But when I open up my voice, it's loud. When I was a teenager working at a Burger King, if they had me up front taking orders, they had to turn my mic off, not down. They had to turn my mic off because all I had to do was turn my head a little to whichever side the counter I needed to be on. It was like 3 fries and a burger, and they heard me clearer than they heard the microphones because it wasn't being garbled. Yeah. So I have tried to like constantly monitor the temper, the loudness, the volume of my voice a lot through my life. Sometimes when I'm upset or frustrated or angry or excited, of course I forget, and people like on the phone when they messed up with Social Security. I was really upset, and she goes, "Ma'am, I can't continue if you're yelling at me." I'm like, "Ma'am, I'm telling you, I'm not yelling at you. Believe me, I'm not yelling at you. It's just I have a loud voice. I'm not yelling. I promise you I'm not yelling." So loud, a voice that carries does come in handy in some instances. One instance was when my first child was in kindergarten. I volunteered until he was in like second grade. Then you start to become more of a distraction because the kids want to talk to you and stuff when they go sharpen their pencils or something, and the teacher's like, "Can you volunteer in like another class?" And I had at this on the after second grade, just because the kids knew me, and they're like, "Oh, there's so and so's mom." Because I volunteered on, like, I was at the PTA. I volunteered on the annual carnival that the school held. I did a lot of that stuff, bake sales and things like that. Kids all knew me. Kids that weren't even in my child's grade. When he was in kindergarten, in first grade, eventually by the end of the year, the fifth graders knew who I was. And my hair wasn't like this. It was that ginger. It was a ginger color. But if you've ever been in a classroom, a kindergarten classroom, after lunch and recess, if you've ever had the pleasure and the delight of either a teacher in kindergarten classes, or a parent who's volunteered or seen, when they come in after lunch and then recess for like 40 minutes, they're sweaty. Remember, this was in Arizona. They're sweaty, they're tired, they're all revved up from all the activity. And it takes a little bit, especially when she's got like 23 kids. And she's like, "Quiet, quiet, guys, find your seats, let's go. Let's go, we gotta start art. Let's go, sit down, get your seats. Get into your groups," that type of thing. And they are, but there's a lot of, how it is. I would just be like, "Quiet! Get to your seats, guys!" Kids are like, of course I didn't open it up, because if I did, you'd be telling me to stop using the mic. um, when I worked, at that time, for 10 years, and it was in that time period that I worked as a corrections officer in a state prisons in Arizona. And I did work on overtime in the women's unit, or if they were short on that unit, some units would send one or two people over to help out from their unit. But I was assigned to the men's units. And when they don't call them rights, they call them incidents. When an incident happens in the prison, P.S. riot, I was on the day shift at that point, and you come in at dark 30, 6 a.m. in the morning. Summer it's not dark, but it is in this winter. And shit's going down, or they're just in the middle of I came into work one day, the entire shift after briefing, walked onto the yard. We were told what happened. We had heard. We walked onto the yard, and the entire inmate population, it was like not an open, it was a semi-open yard. They did have yards, but they weren't allowed just to roam anytime, type of thing. We come in, and all the inmates are lying on their stomachs on the field with their hands click tied, click strapped, behind them, because you have to get everybody, and you're trying to get them into their units. And so that ain't gonna happen, into their housing units, or block cells or whatever that's set up. Yeah, it's a lot easier just to stabilize and immobilize right on the scene. So you're gonna have a fun day at work when you come out of briefing, and the whole shift is going out to relieve all the different posts. And as you're walking to your yard, your post, you see all these inmates lying on the ground, click strapped on their stomachs, and you're like, and you can't leave them there for long, because hours and hours, because I mean, it's hot in Arizona. You can't do that, you know? So you know. Because first thing we usually do, day shift, would get your shit together, relieve the other officers, get briefed from each other what's going on in that yard, that housing unit, and then you start breakfast, pretty much. Right, bing. Because you got all kinds of other things, school and all this other law libraries and all this other crap going on. Some of them have work programs they have to be out on to the crews in time. Um, you know you're going to have a fun day. And all those guys for hours have been out there, and you've got to get them back in without another thing erupting and get breakfast done because you also have to serve lunch on your shift, on day shift. Um, but I told that story because I've been, I was in a maximum unit, the first unit from the academy that I was assigned to, and you have to stay up in that because it's an hour and a half from Tucson and an hour and a half from Phoenix. So nobody, unless you live in the area, and a lot of people don't want to live in it because it's a small town right around there. Um, and so you had to work for like a year and a half, unless you could get a hardship to either where you live, Tucson or Phoenix. So you have an hour and a half there and an hour and a half back every day, besides your normal shift. And there were times that they would have an incident at another unit up in that complex and on your shift. And shit will be going down, and they put out the word anybody. This was when I was on swing shift. Anybody in a different complex from it was one in Tucson I just told you about, but we got a message. It went out on the radio. The unit was called Cook Unit, and it was interesting because we were Special Maximum SMU, and those are like the worst of the worst. Either they did really bad crimes, or their crimes weren't so bad, but in prison they've just gotten so many write-ups. They've always gotten in trouble. They're like a problem child. And like the leaders, the number one and two of the gangs, they usually keep in places like that. You're not going to stop the communications and the codes and the passing and shit, but I mean, you're never going to stop it completely. But you can temper, you can monitor better when the heads of like the ABs, the Aryan Brotherhoods, or the old Mexican Mafia, or the New Mexican Mafia, you know, any of the other gangs. They actually had a Native American gang. My sergeant from the academy was in that unit, and after he got done with his teaching in the academy, he but he was one of the ones that first identified the very first Native American gang. And he also, in the women's unit, Manzanita was the name of the unit. Um, Usually women, it's interesting because, well, I mean, depending, but women in prisons don't have gangs. They have more like families. It's set up differently. I mean, the loyalty is there and everything, but it's set up differently just because women and men are different. Um, but they usually don't have families. He was also him in the SMU team. The search unit was also identified the first female gang that actually considered themselves a gang and not a family. So the guy who the sergeant who taught my academy class actually had some good knowledge, and some of the, oh my god, some of the paraphernalia that was gotten in searches. I had a whole bunch, but when I moved to Tucson, from Tucson to here, we could only fit what would go in my van, my sister's van. I mean, there was, because we were driving back to Jersey from, that's when I was moving back here, and I just, it was a situation, it wasn't unexpected, it was unexpected. So I couldn't take more than that. So I mean, your absolute essentials, photo albums, some clothes, I mean, memento things, videos, you know, that was first to me. Um, but it was You learned a whole lot working in, at least I did, working in the prison. You learn a lot about interpersonal communications. At least I'm not sure about other states, but I know in Arizona, we actually trained. They didn't have, the cops didn't have their own academy, so it was the Correctional Officer Training Academy and what they called Alita COTA, COTA, Correctional Officer Training Academy, and then Alita, Arizona, law enforcement. Yeah, Alita was the cops, and we were in the same academy. They, of course, we're in different classes, but we're on the same tracks, the same equipment, everything. We learned the same self-defense and pressure points, things that the cop cadets were training. In fact, we had to make way when any civilian went by or any, teacher, any sergeant or lieutenant that was there, because it's like set up as paramilitary. And even though the elite of the cop cadets were also cadets, as we were correction officer cadets, we still had to make way for the fucking cop cadets. And they were cadets, they were trainees too. But we had to make way for them. So if we were outside grabbing a smoke, during break or whatever, going about whatever, and they walked past, you had to fucking make way for them, make a hole. And that always kind of irked us because y'all are using our academy. Something happened to theirs. So a couple years before I left the corrections, they had built finally the cop academy, Alita, across the street, and in big open area, and you drive in at 5 in the morning, and they had a building that they would set on fire to teach how to teach that stuff. Sometimes, or you'd be leaving in the afternoon, as you drive past, you're like, oh, they're doing the gas training, or oh, they're training on the fire shit. It was pretty funny, but yeah, they were trainees too. So, I mean, the way they're actually, they're called a boot when they get into the police academy when they get out of the academy and get into their assignment. They call it when they're training with their cop, who's training them on the job. They're called a boot. It's like, I told you, it's paramilitary, like boot camp, And, so they finally get their comeuppance, because they got a lot of that shit. I mean, they have a cop, they're riding with one for weeks, And once we graduate the academy and go to our units, we have like 3 days on the job training, and then it's like, go for it. Oh, you come in one day and you're not assigned with the person, oh my, I'm assigned the control by myself. Well, shit. I hope I paid attention enough. It's stressful. I mean, some of those guys weren't good. I've worked in other units too, lesser and the minimum, from minimum to maximum, all in between. But it does teach you a lot of things, and I'll tell you one thing it did teach. Number one, that's how I got into this whole thing, my voice. That's a third situation. When shit's happening and, sergeants, lieutenants are yelling orders. There was one time, I mean, it's not my place to, interrupt, but they weren't being heard. It was out on the field and they just were not being heard. Somebody went to go get the megaphone, the bullhorn, but he was not being heard. So they weren't complying. So I thought I'd get in trouble, but I yelled the exact same thing he did, but I opened my voice. I'm like, on the ground! I'm not going to do it now because there's a bunch of kids on the playground. But it was like, on the ground, now! But like 10 times louder. And even the lieutenant, I could see his head. He was standing over there, and I could see his head whip over to me like, who's the hell's talking, Because I didn't have the place to say. But I knew I could help. and I didn't want to go over to. I just did it because it needed to be done. They needed to stop. And I later on I was like, "Ugh, I'm sorry, but I just knew that my voice is loud. I knew I could get their attention." And he started laughing, um, and he goes, "No, no, no, I'm not upset about that." He says, "I just didn't." He kept looking at me like, "I just didn't know you had that voice." I'm like, I was like, "Well, you see why I don't open it up unless I have to, because oh God, I'm not gonna live this shit down. Those inmates are gonna be fucking with me. I mean, teasing me like, oh no, it's the voice, it's the mouth." They did. It's the mouth. Oh my God. They weren't upset though, because actually, the more they couldn't hear the order, the more it was escalating, the more frustrated the lieutenants and the sergeants and the officers were getting, because we knew where it was leading, and it was simply not because they weren't listening to us, they weren't hearing it. And it was like maybe 45 seconds after that, when the guy the officer comes running up with the bullhorn. I think they needed to replace the batteries or some damn thing. And then the sergeant kind of chuckled because he goes, "Here's the bullhorn," and the cute guy looked a little confused because they were obeying now. And I mean, this all happened in a matter of like seconds. And when the lieutenant said, "No, I just didn't know you have that voice," and the sergeant says, "Well, we damn well know now." um, yeah, and there were times that maybe I was in the control room and not on the yard, and if something happened, they would be like, "Get her on the mic, get her on the speaker, just tell them to, lay down." Or one time it was, "Go back to your cells, go back to your yards," because they were on the field time, and they're like, "Go back to your yards." So, and on a mic, that's why I said with the megaphone, I'll be dangerous. um, but yeah, a prison was an interesting thing. But the voice, it does come in handy on occasion, the loud voice. The other thing that it comes in handy for, protests. Yeah, even without a megaphone at the last protest I was at, we had an instigator. He had like long gray beard, skinny guy, dusty jeans, t-shirt, and he had a big 5 by 3 American flag carried around on a flagpole. And he would get up by the protesters. He would stalk up and down the side and try to like agitate a little bit. And this was April 19th, and the guy, it was right behind me, and the guy was a tall guy, but he had a handmade sandwich thing on, and it was all about, both sides were about women's rights. Um, so that's the one the guy walked up on. And the guy who walked up on the protester was like, I mean, he wasn't even, but he had like some balls, and he was just, I couldn't hear what they were saying because they were behind me. I was I had my walker, and happened to be sitting because my foot was hurting. I was holding my sign and everything, and I heard some commotion. I kind of looked back, and that's what I saw. And I had seen that guy walking up earlier. And I had just read that morning about because they were just starting to find out that Republicans were like doing planting, like acting, putting it, well, protest, instigators, but also what they're doing. So be aware if you're going to a protest. What they've been finding to do now is they'll somebody will people will show up, one or a couple, acting like they're protesters, And once they, it feels like, oh, I'm part of the group now, they'll say something, or we should go and make them move or something like that, or we should and like get the protesters, riled and more riled, and try to get them to do something that, so then the cops have to do something, so then it will be on the news. Look, they're dissenters, they're not peaceful. And so don't let them do that. If somebody is doing something that you're like, in your gut, you're like, that's not what we're saying. No, 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 no. We're not saying they should all be killed. No, 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 no. If anybody does that, do not let them drag you into doing it, because it's probably somebody who's doing it. They keep accusing us of all being paid, so the protests don't matter because we're being paid. That's why it's important. We got about a little over 5 million on the April 19th, the last national one. There's been protests all across the country since then. Nearly every day at Tesla, on the overpasses, at certain places, all across the country. It's just not mobilized like a national day. This will be the third, I believe. And they need to know that we're not paid protesters. Now, in order for a country and a population to change the government, there has to be, I think they said 3.5% of the population needs to be on board and actively speaking out and protest, you know what I mean? Saying something, not just letting shit go. Doing a video, making a post or a graphic every day. I mean, something. When 3.5 of the population, of the voting population, begin showing up like that consistently, that is the tipping point. 3.5% of the population unhappy, and unhappy enough to speak out publicly against it. 3.5% is the magic number. Now, it doesn't all fall back. It's the magic number that we need at least that many to understand what's happening and be justly pissed off about it, to be speaking up. That is when companies, that is when organizations start really paying attention. 3.5%. You can go look up how many people in America, how much is 3.5% of American population, of American voters, anything. Just do some research. I'm not going to use the term, just search the internet. Do your research! And you know, people are like, 5 million, that's a lot of fucking people. I mean, we're not that. Nope, we're not there yet. But we're getting there. Because my nephew's going to a protest. Nobody else in my family has. But they know how, I don't want to say rabid, but how intense I am. And they're starting to be like, some of the things she was saying 8 months ago, now they're doing that. So maybe she wasn't paranoid. And now they believe me. Now they come to me and ask, what else is going to happen? What else? Somebody said such and such. Are they looking at that? So he's going to his first protest. A protest. The other thing is, I'm always telling people, work the polling place. It's a 16-hour day, yes. $300, you get a check about 30 days after the election. It's just the Jersey rule. In Arizona, if you were assigned the place by the time election came and you weren't like a call-in for a last minute, somebody got sick or something, you got, if you were already assigned, your check was there, and they were distributed just before we left, after everything was broken down and packed up. We were issued our check. Got our checks, and we left. But that could be different. That was like 30 years ago in Arizona. But 3.5% of the population. So you might think, I know it matters, but Saturday is the only day I have, or something like that. Or there's already been 5 million out there last time. I'm sure that's fine. No, it's not, guys. It's not fine. We do need that 3.5%. And if you do your research on how many people in America and how much is 3.5% of that, you'll see that 5 million isn't enough yet for the tipping point. The longer it takes for us to amass the amount of protesters, pissed off people that are finally pissed off enough and got enough courage to speak out on a consistent basis. And I mean, like, at least every other day. I mean, say something. Because if everybody's doing that, just one thing a day, that's the other thing. It would be overwhelming. Yeah, going through feeds on social media would be a little depressing, but seeing all of those good things going on isn't always that depressing. We need 3.5% of the population ready to show this administration, hell no, you've got to fucking go. Working the elections, like I said, when you think, oh, $300, when you do the math, 16 hours, you have to be there at 5 because the polls open at 6. They're to open till 8 at night. You got to pack up. You probably don't get there by 9. You're there by 4:35. Like me, I had to take a lift, so I don't have a car, so I had to make sure I was there earlier. But it's a long day, and when you math it out, yeah, you're not getting tons of money, but you're doing a civic duty. You're learning how elections work, and you are getting $300. And while you're working and exhausted, and the next day when you're recuperating, fair warning, the older you get, the more time you need to recuperate. I learned that. But it not only does your civic duty, but you know what? Afterwards, you forget. By the time you get your check, you forgot how draining it was. And I don't know about others, but it's not just the money. It was at first, but you have knowledge is power. Okay, it is. I didn't get bent about the election was rigged because I know how elections work. I know they couldn't have been handed each other a thumb drive because, as far as I know, elections don't use a thumb drive. In fact, they're not hooked up to the internet. They have a router and they use Wi-Fi and connectivity, but the only thing connected to that server, to that, is the other election equipment in New Jersey. That's all. And that's the way it is with other states. You don't just because you have internet, you have a Wi-Fi connectivity, it doesn't mean you're automatically publicly, on the internet, the interweb. It's a private thing, just for government elections. If you went to the class that you have to go to every time you work the elections every year, just in case things changed, but if you had gone to at least one class, everybody, they would have known the shit and bull crap that they were saying and making people believe because they didn't know how elections work. They didn't know that thumb drives aren't a thing in elections. So even if they were handing each other a thumb drive, Maybe it was something personal she was giving her mom, or her mom was giving her for their own information. She needed some, and it was easier just to do it that way. Maybe, even if, I mean, it wasn't a thumb drive, it was a ginger mint, which happened to be very good. Um, Even if it was a thumb drive, it would have been a personal one because, as far as I know, they're not on the web. They're connected to internet like Wi-Fi, but there is no bleed over into public internet. So don't you think if everybody who voted knew that the whole rigging bullshit story wouldn't have gained much traction because they would have known that those are not used. Um, if you're going to a protest, um, it looks like rain. We're gonna have rain, at least on the East Coast. Of Jersey, they're expecting rain. Apparently, I was reading somebody that's in DC said that I was reading and they on a group and they said, "Oh, it's thundering, it's lightning, it's storming right now in DC." So yeah, and on Blue Sky, yesterday I saw the account, um, I'm God or something. It's me God or something like that. This is God or I am God. They had Blue Sky and it said something about all they did was post a screenshot of the weather forecast for DC for Saturday. And it was funny because you just like, you can thank me later. Because the military, or the military has already advised the administration that if it's raining, the parade will be fine. If there's thunderstorms, which are currently now, um, that they will not do the parade. They refuse because if there's thunderstorms, there's lightning. If there's lightning, they said they're not going to endanger all the parade viewers, and they're not going to endanger their personnel because, especially with all those fucking tanks and everything in DC, like no lightning rods there. So I'm sure he's probably chucking Costco jugs of ketchup at the wall, ranting to Stephen Miller that you better stop the fucking rain tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised if he's screaming, Who do I have to call to change the weather? Well, if you ask Marjorie Taylor Greene, the people to call if you don't want rain, Trump, are the Jews with their space lasers and their hurricane machines. Yeah, better get on the phone to Green, Donald. The Jews are causing thunderstorms for your parade. That's sarcasm in case nobody knew. um, so, if you're protesting, let me know. You don't have to tell me where. I get some people don't want to be known. My attitude is y'all fucking know me anyway for the last 3 years on video. So, Heidi now. I mean, I'm not going out of my way, but, to be noted. But there's already content. You're gonna notice me if you notice me. I mean, what am I gonna do? Delete all my video? No. But bring an umbrella. And if you have like that clear gloss spray type stuff, you might want to throw some on your sign. I've got all my signs. Both sides are sprayed like that, except my stand-up signs. I haven't sprayed the back of all of them. Bring an umbrella, bring a slicker, whatever, just in case. And just be aware, as I'm sure you are, that every place there are real high tensions. And remember, there are there's a growing number of Trump voters that are anywhere from disillusioned to fucking pissed off at Trump and Republicans right now. The fact that they're not having town halls, and when they did, and people, questioned them agitatedly, they had them attacked, and wrestled to the ground and zip tied. um, so there's a lot of people that did vote for them that are hot under the collar right now. They're not ready to be known as I don't support this shit anymore, because they know how their own MAGA can be vicious. So they don't want to make that known, but they're still not happy. And if MAGA wasn't so vicious and they didn't know who they were with is vicious, they wouldn't be worried. So just keep that in mind too. It'll be interesting to see if we have less instigators or more. But at any rate, take pictures. I never got pictures of myself, so I'm gonna try to remember that. I've emptied my phone, so I've got like 43% capacity open. I got rid of last week apps that I haven't used because they take up quite a bit. So I am thinking, I never got video. Like I said, I got pictures of others, not of myself. I will try to get, with my whole rig set up, I'll get somebody to take a picture for me. And I definitely want to try to get some video just so you can hear the enthusiasm. And I'm considering, see, if you go live, it's not like it's storing on your phone, because you can't video super long. It's a phone, unless you upload it immediately without editing or anything like that. But live stream is different. I mean, we've seen in the last few weeks, there was a couple like TikTokers or YouTubers that were just as a people part of a protest, and one was in the middle of live streaming. It wasn't even what she didn't even say anything. It was the guy next to her, and it wasn't even anything. He just says, remember your oath, bitch, or something like that. And they turned around, they jumped them both and zip tied them. And she was live streaming. Now, remember your oath, bitch, is not worthy of that. I was called 10 times worse as a corrections officer. And they were convicted inmates. Not felons, but not all of them. Because that would be federal prison. But we weren't allowed to go take someone down, drag them out of the cell. Hell, I had piss thrown on me. At least I didn't have crap thrown on me, which some officers did. Yeah, they weren't very nice. Yes, it was in the special maximum supermax unit. We weren't allowed to handcuff them. Yeah, we did send the team in to take them out, and because there's got to be discipline, type of thing. But and put him in a holding cell, a small thing, so you just think about what you did, You just stay in there and you think. I mean, it's got a toilet and a sink, and a cot, but that's about it. It's very small. And it's not meant for permanent, but 2-3 days. Sometimes if you're trying to moving people around and that person's not out, but this person got here already, you got to keep them there until we can get that guy moved to the sometimes so it's a holding cell, or if somebody's acted out. And it's not like we can just go over and be like, hey, wake up, bitch, but they can yell all kinds of shit at us. And we're not allowed to do anything unless they physically do something towards us. Do you know how many names as a corrections officer not only I but others have been called? You can't just take them down and cuff them, and we had cuffs. Oh God, yeah, it was must have been 40 pounds just on the belt. Because you have a regular belt, and then you have your duty belt and your all your holders, and those just weigh. Then you've got your couple speed loaders, pouches on the belt, and you had some, your radio, which does weigh, and then your cuffs, and you had a pack with your gloves and your CPR mask. I mean, it was just, your belt had no more fucking room by the time you had the stays on. So those leather straps that snap, they're supposed to go around your regular belt that keeps your pants up, and it's clipped. So it ties them kind of together, and you put them, you know, like one here, there, to kind of in between the radio and all that. Basically, it's to keep your duty belt and your regular belt in the right place, so they're not sliding against each other and everything. Because the duty belt does have a tendency to weigh down, and then that'll pull on your pants and make it uncomfortable with your belt, your regular belt. So it's not that easy in the middle of an altercation, physical, and you've got all that shit on you, and you still got to be able to maneuver and move with it all on you, in your way, bulky. It's not glamorous. Trust me. People that glamorize law enforcement, because it is considered law enforcement. Trust me, it's not as glamorous as it may appear. You don't get the respect you probably should. And unfortunately, there's power trippers there too. I used to tell the inmates, listen, I'm not here to punish you. Basically, because they called corrections officers cops. Hey, the cops are coming. That I was like, so first time I heard that, I said to the officer, cops are here? He goes, that's us. I'm like, oh, I'm the cop. Oh, okay. I went to correctional officer training, not cop training. It was weird to have that thrown at you, like, because first time I heard it, he was like, hey, cop, hey, here's a cop. And I'm like, where? They'll call you CO a lot, correction officer. Hey, CO. But, it's, it definitely prepared me, I think, for protests. Because that's the other thing, besides all the other, nerve points, pressure points, all that other, flip, roll type of shit, flip somebody over you, all that crap. You have to do 2 minutes of three officers trying to attack you while you're on the ground fending them off. It's called the 2-minute drill. And for 2 minutes, you have protective gear, but for 2 minutes, you have to fight them off while you're on the ground, and they're not. That is the longest 2 effing minutes you have ever felt. The other thing you have to do to pass, just that physical part, I mean, you have to, now there's a mat. Do not knock this over. There's like a mat on the floor. You stand on the edge of the mat. It's long ways. You hold your hands like this, just even so your nose doesn't get squashed, right? Just like this in front of your face. And you're supposed to just let yourself, not kneel, just let yourself face plant, fall down with your legs blocked straight. As you might be if somebody comes up and shoves you as an officer. You go, just boop. You're standing here, you're not bending, or you have to go, here's the mat, here's you have to go. And the only thing that catches you is your hands right before your face, and they have to be staying like this, so that you know what it feels like, so you know how fast you have to recover. Your instinct. is to take a step as you get to a certain angle. You take, because you're trying to, your body instinctively attempts to balance you and keep you from falling. And you basically have to override that conditioned reflex and control it so you can fall and know what it felt like. It's a very weird feeling falling like that. It's not like your normal when you fall, you trip or something, because a lot of times your knees will bend. It is so weird because the knees will take some of the pressure off, so when your arm hits, it's not as hard. But when you're falling flat down, man, your hands, your palms actually make a slap sound on the mat because they're hitting flat, or they should be. And if you didn't do it correctly the first time, you have to keep doing it until you do it correctly. It sounds like such a simple thing, but it was scary for some of us because, and it was frustrating because you were trying to override your instinctual reflex and you were just getting more and more pissed off. Um, yeah, interesting. But again, you also learn, and you get retrain. You get like refresher every year. For 1 week, you don't report to your office. Somebody reports in your stead, so they're not shorthanded, and you spend 40 hours that week up at the main part of the complex doing requalification. It's not just on the range with your shotgun, rifle, and handgun qualifications. And you have to go through basic life support (BLS) for adult, child, and infant because you might be working visitation. You have to know the Heimlich maneuver, be certified in BLS, and the Heimlich for again adult, child, and infant because they're different. Um, you have to go through every year. You go through again the personality classes, and they remind you of the different types of personalities. They divide you in groups, and of one type of personality in each group. So you actually have to work with those personalities, and is just the type A, type B, introvert, extroverts, and you learn about working with other personality types, how to you know work together using your differences as a strength instead of a difference between you, so you're a unified front, that kind of stuff. I mean, and so much more. You go through it every fucking year. Um, and one of the things that it's not like a specific class, but they do talk about de-escalation a lot when you're retraining, and that's part of the psychology, the personalities portion, the day that we do all that, because it does matter when you're trying to de-escalate a situation. If you know that stuff, it actually makes it a little easier because you've worked with the inmates or whatever. You know the types of person, and you know how that type of personality usually would react to this situation, and how that kind of personality would work with this. So, in the same situation, you see what I'm saying? So it does teach you some of that psychology of de-escalating or not inciting something, kind of mellowing it out. One of the things I haven't seen any of the activists do of they're offering it now. 50501 New Jersey just did, and I just saw it, and it was a lot of what I learned in the prisons. But there was a few things they did not mention, and I think it's only because those who had the lieutenant that we had in my first unit in the special maximum unit, SMU, he's told us something. My class of the academy was 53 people, only 5 were women. I mean, that was back when I was in my 30s. Um, of those 5 women, 3 of us were assigned with like 6 of the men, to the special maximum unit. So the first day on the job, an Irish, big old ginger-headed lieutenant, and he was not like he was never in the military, so neither was the sergeant who trained me. So they were trying to get used to the paramilitary stuff themselves, you know. So I didn't know, we didn't know it at the time, but he was like a month or 6 weeks away from retiring, which is probably another reason why he was a lot less, you know, buttoned up. But he said something that I mentioned today at a MHA picnic to a caseworker and another client, and the caseworker was like, "No, that makes sense." And the other client was a guy. I'm like, "I'm really curious on your thought. I'll tell you in a minute." And he said, "No, that makes sense. That makes sense." Um, he told the women that you women actually have more power here than you men. And some of the men chuckled because we're thinking the same thing. Like, you sure about that? um, and then he went on to say, and this is true, the black inmates, you know, those gangs, the Aryans, the Mexican mafias, all of them respect the women because if their mamas or their aunties found out that they were disrespectful to a woman or hurt her or something, those mamas and those aunties are, and probably their sisters and cousins, will not be happy with them. A lot of them, you think it's a gang, but they actually do have rules, even in prison. I mean, a murderer is understandable. A rapist or a child molester, if they find out, if the inmates find out another inmate is in there, they called them chomos, child molesters, was that or a rapist, that inmate probably has to be moved to a different unit because he might wind up in segregation because it'll get around to all the units, no matter how far away they do. Inmates are transferred, moved around, and the word gets out. So, um, it's a lot. It's interesting, but a lot of the psychology with the protests and talking down irate and a little unstable MAGA people um, is a lot. And I don't want it to sound, you know, but it's a lot like the de-escalation we were taught in the prisons. And I don't want to sound dramatic, you know, and I don't want to be like, oh, she compared MAGA to inmates. No, but the psychology is the same way. And I'm going to finish it up by saying the psychology. The women have more control because the men, inmates or not, they do have codes. And messing with women, when I was pregnant with my first kid, I had inmates come up to me and they told me, hey, CO, if, it was my married name, they called me by my last name, if if anything ever happens on this yard, you know that none of us are going to let you get hurt. I was like, okay. And he says, even the ones that, I said, even the ones that don't like me? Keep messing with him. And he looked at me real serious. He goes, no, man. Fucking with women, hurting women, and a pregnant woman. He says, my mama would never let me in the family again. And he said all the others are the same way, even from the rival gangs. That's what he told me. He caught me well. No, there was nobody else. He let me know that. He said, I'm just letting you know not to worry, especially because you're pregnant. You are absolutely will not be touched. Even by, he says, and if there's any inmates that try, we will keep them from it. I was like, yeah. And I found out later when I asked a lieutenant that was a decent person. She said actually that is true. She goes, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised one of them told you that, because whenever we have a pregnant officer, somebody, no matter what yards, one of an inmate eventually will let them know. They don't want you to stress about it. That's why they tell you. Because I said, well, why tell me? Just do it if it happens. He says, because I don't want you worrying about it, and none of us want you worrying about it, because he goes, that's not good for the baby. I was an inmate, so I'm not an inmate lover. A lot of them belong there, but